I've got a whole list of traps that people fall into when they start thinking about podcasting and getting excited about the opportunity and thinking like, oh, I listen to a lot of really cool podcasts. Maybe I should have a podcast. I like bringing it back to that impact because there are so many creative ways to approach the medium of podcasting. I've been recently calling it flexible format that are not just the stereotype that we often think of, like I interview other successful
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. So there are so many creative ways to leverage the platform of podcasting and the media of podcasting that I think can often get overlooked when people have a fixed idea in mind of, I will do this interview style podcast, I will reach more people, I will get more clients, my business will grow. When that is the thinking from jump, a lot of times we end up in disappointment and what we refer to in the business as podfade.
Andrea, welcome to my podcast. You and I have talked, and you talk a lot about being outside of the box when it comes to looking at podcasts. Let's just start right there and give our listeners a little bit more about what that means.
Yes. So I'm going to right away flip this around on you. I am going to answer your question. Don't worry. In your business, so take podcasting out of it, because obviously you have a podcast. We are listening to your podcast now. But in your business, in your work, in the things that you do you consider yourself to be a purpose-driven entrepreneur?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And what is the one thing in your heart of hearts when you think about the work that you do? What is the one thing that you wish that everybody understood about the work that you do? Something that maybe could be life-changing for people if they just knew this one thing, or if they just connected with you. What would that be?
It would be that income jumping and building an ecosystem that breathes is not that complicated, and it changes your life so you actually get to enjoy life while money is being made in the background.
Okay. So when I am working with somebody who is either thinking of creating a podcast for the first time, or they maybe already have a podcast that's been trucking along, many months or years or episodes, that is the one thing that I want to focus on. A lot of times we end up in disappointment and what we refer to in the business as podfade.
Oh, okay.
Have you heard this term before?
No, I haven't. I like that.
Podfade is, I can't take credit for it. It's been around in the ether for a long time, but podfade is basically when you have so much excitement, so much momentum, you create your podcast, and then 5, 6 episodes in, could be 7 episodes in, could be 50 episodes in, you're just like, this is hard. It's time consuming, it's expensive, and you just stop. You don't necessarily have a plan for a classy, outgoing ending to your show. You just stop because it just becomes too much for the return that you're seeing on that investment of time and energy and resources. And so I like to get creative with people, come back to what is that purpose that you have? What is that impact that you want to make? And how can we leverage the concept of podcasting to create what I call a more powerful podcast for you that's going to be more impactful, more sustainable as we branch into the nuts and bolts of production and putting it out there.
Okay, so is that like, well, as an example, on YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's talking head format. There is the is it worth it format. There's the game show format. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about in the sense of when you do your podcast, it doesn't have to be interview style podcast. It could be conversational style. I'm assuming there's other ones. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Even if you're going to do an interview style format. So
Okay.
interview style is across the board, it's the most popular format. It's the most common that you find. And a lot of people don't realize it's actually one of the harder formats to do well. And part of that is because there are already so many shows out there. And so when we look at the data across the podcasting landscape, we see that most regular podcast listeners, they have 3 to 5 shows that are their favorites.
Yeah.
So if there are hundreds, thousands of interview-based podcasts out there, and they're not all going to be like yours, but maybe there are a lot that have similar topics that cover similar things. And so what is going to be special, unique, creative, exciting about yours that is going to catch and also capture their attention so that you become one of those 3 to 5 favorites that they listen to week after week? And that could be a format thing. That could be just infusing your own unique voice into the way that you're having these conversations or the types of questions that you ask. It could be breaking rules and being controversial in your niche, in your space, having a take on something that is not the normal advice. It could be thinking about, am I going to do this as a limited series instead of like an ongoing show? Just because you want to use podcasting doesn't mean that you have to deliver an episode every single week, every week of the year, forever and ever, which can, I know you talk a lot about burnout on your show. That can be a great recipe for burnout, especially because of a lot of people that I work with, nonprofit leaders, small business owners. We're not podcasting full time. It is one thing that we do amongst many other. And so if you're on this hamster wheel of thinking that you have to fit that mold, that can lead directly to burnout. And so I'm like, can we think about a season?
Okay.
Can we think about a theme for your season? And before we even think about a theme for your season, can we back it up and go back to that purpose that you have, that one thing that you want people to know, and ask the questions of, what is it that I want them to do?
Yeah.
What is the impact? Is it really that I want more clients? Fine. It can be tricky to actually use your podcast expressly for new client prospecting or pipeline or conversion or, all these businessy terms. It's a challenging route to go that way. And there may be, like you said, faster, simpler routes to that. But understanding how you can leverage the conversations that you're having, the talks that you're giving, the episodes that you're putting together, how can you really leverage that in your larger media strategy and communication strategy so that you're creating a space to build deeper relationships with those people who may eventually convert to clients if that's your goal? Or in a lot of cases, I am not working with people who are looking for client conversion from their podcast. In a lot of cases, I'm working with clients who are, for example, I have one client who her show is called Conversations with a Wounded Healer. Her name's Sarah Bueno. And she, over the course of her podcast, she actually shifted her business model. And the podcast was a big part of that because through the conversations that she was having with other people in her industry, she got very clear on what was missing.
Yep.
And this is a niche that I can fill, right? So she actually sold her private therapy practice and moved into consulting for practice owners and leadership. Why she uses the podcast, or the way she uses the podcast, is great because it's about building her network, building her community, staying on top of what are therapists, practitioners, business owners, what are they saying? And that keeps her as a consultant fresh. It keeps her on top of what are the challenges. And so it's not so much about like someone is going to listen to the podcast and sign up to work with her, though that would be great. They can certainly do that.
Yeah.
But it's about, how do I grow as a professional, and who am I connected with, and what rooms am I speaking in, and where am I getting opportunities, and who can connect me with this person who needs this thing. And so her podcast is really focused on relationship building, not on achieving new clients. So the creativity piece, this is a very long-winded way of saying, the creative piece might be about format. It might be about approach, and it might just be about understanding what your podcast is actually designed to do, and then knowing what are the pieces that we need to integrate or the decisions that we need to make that leads towards that outcome in the overall media and marketing and communication landscape that you're building.
Okay, so tell me if I'm doing it right now that we have all that information. It's funny, I'm editing a YouTube video that I just made yesterday for today, and I'm talking about this. It's like, why do I use YouTube? It's not to sell, it's not to fill things up. It really is my collaboration. It's my partner where I can refine what I'm talking about. I can learn and get more clarity on my niche. I can really get that insight, like you were just saying. And so I see that in the podcast too. Now, if the podcast was solo, it would be even more. But since it's not, I bring on guests. But when I look at the guests, I look at it and I say, what can I learn from it? And what can my listeners learn from it?
Yeah.
And I see it as I'm an expert, but I also know the experts. And I'm
Right.
bringing people on to help share with you so you can grow faster because I'm growing faster doing it. So my whole look at doing the podcast is that I get to meet a lot of new people. I get to have conversations about things that I'm not necessarily an expert in. Like I have a podcast. Am I an expert in podcasting? Absolutely not. Like, no. Like we were talking earlier, I keep my tech very simple. I keep a lot of stuff very simple. It's easier for me. But I bring on really cool people. And even if they have a product, because I'm service-based or my clients, even if the product is like, okay, let's talk about your journey. Like, how did you get there? What did you do? And we're always learning something. So I don't know if I can niche mine down more, but that's kind of what I'm focused on with my podcast.
Well, and you actually, because I dug back through your back catalog when we started talking online and looked at some of the topics and guests that you've had on, and I noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, you actually made a pivot in your podcast because you started originally, your show did not have its current name. Was it called Effortless Closing? Was that the original name?
Yep.
Okay. And that was directly tied to real estate.
Yes, it was.
Okay. When did you pivot?
I pivoted about 6 months ago.
Okay.
Which is
And
crazy because I've been coaching and doing this for about 6 years,
okay.
but only 2 years online.
Okay.
And so when I started online, I had a course for real estate agents. It was growing really fast and doing really well, but I was not loving it. And I'm somebody, because this is what I teach. If you're not authentic and you're not loving it, don't do it. So I made that change. And so I changed everything.
So business model, approach, strategy,
What I'm selling,
podcast,
the
what you're
course, I
selling.
shut it all down, started all fresh. And that's why I changed it to the Christina Kokologiannakis show.
Yeah.
Because it's really towards women entrepreneurs who have a business, who have consistent sales, but want to make those income jumps, want to go that next level, but they're exhausted, they're tired, they don't want to do more. And the problem is that they feel like they have to do more to get to it, which is not how you do it. I'm a multi-millionaire. I have multiple businesses that are really successful. I've sold over $100 million in sales. That is not the way to do it. And so I'm teaching them the right way and a very simplified way of doing it so that you build an ecosystem and an empire that funds the lifestyle you want to live.
Okay. And did you, when you made the pivot with your podcast, did you already have all of your new services, all of your new sales copy, all of your new messaging? Did you already know all of that when you?
No.
Correct. Yes. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, good.
I had to figure it out. And the cool thing is doing YouTube, doing the podcast, I'm figuring out, I'm getting so much more clarity because each time I do something, I look at the downloads, but I look, it's like, did that resonate? Did people like that? No, but that one was, okay, I'm going to take an element of that one, make a new one, doing it a little differently, and then see how that lands. So that's how I'm trying to do it. But it's gotten me so much clarity because I'm sitting here refining what I'm talking about every day.
Yeah, 100%. And that brings me to another trap that people fall into. And I'm going to come back to you specifically. Don't think I'm going to like skate by, like, am I doing this right? Another trap that people fall into is measuring the success of their podcast by the number of downloads that they're getting. And I understand why that happens is because, so for those who have not gotten into the world of podcasting, this term is confusing because it means something different in podcasting than anywhere else. So when somebody says downloads in conjunction with podcasting, that either means the file of your episode was downloaded onto somebody's device, but you don't know whether actually anyone ever listened to it, but the file transfer happened.
Yeah.
Or download also can mean somebody streamed this and listened to it, but it was never downloaded to, to my device. And also, one download does not necessarily mean one person. And there's all kinds of boring techie reasons for why that is the case. Also, every tech platform measures downloads differently. So Apple Podcasts will tell you one thing, Spotify will tell you one thing. They're only measuring on their platforms and only in a certain way. Your podcast host is going to tell you another number. A third-party company is going to tell you a totally different number. And people will look at this number and hinge how they feel about the success of their podcast and whether this is working on that number. How big is the number? How big should it be? Is it growing? Is it growing fast enough? Do we even know if these are the same people listening episode after episode, or are these like new people who are dipping in? There's so much that isn't automatically visible or automatically clear, that hinging your success or failure of your podcast on downloads is an exercise in frustration. And so what I like to do is the approach that you're talking about, which is looking into the data and looking beyond just numbers to see what are the stories that I can get out of my data. But looking at, if this YouTube video of my episode, or if this audio episode on Spotify got a ton more visibility, what might be contributing to that? Can I notice any trends? Like,
Yeah.
when my episode is less than 45 minutes, if I put it on a graph, I can see that the ones that are longer are getting fewer listens and the ones that are shorter are getting more listens. That's not the case. That's not advice telling people to do under 45 minutes necessarily. But can you look at the trends in your own media and your own results to see, is it certain keywords that are working well for you? Is it certain topics that tend to be more popular, tend to be trending? Does it depend on who your guest is? And if your guest name is in the episode, is it something to do with maybe the way that you promoted that particular episode? Like, what are the different factors that could be contributing to these trends? And what can you learn about that for your business going forward in terms of how you're describing your services, what services people may need that are filling a gap, and that's a popular topic that people are looking for because you got so many more people clicking on and listening to that episode. Like, this is something that's resonating. Maybe I can look into that a little bit further. Another thing that I like about what you're doing, and this is something that your listeners, unless they've been on your show, unless they've been a guest, they're not going to necessarily know this, but when I booked this interview, I get an email from Christina, and it has a number of things in it that make it so easy for me, someone who is new to Christina, new to her brand, new to her show. It makes it so easy for me to connect in to your network. Meaning that there is, hey, let's follow each other on social media. There's one. I would like to also promote your things on social media. What are you up to? What are you sharing? What's new? Okay, so we're creating reciprocity here, right? Also, if you're interested, here is my community. This is who my community's for. It might be for you, it might not be. It's not pushy. Christina's not over here like, I'm booking Andrea onto my show and I'm going to get her into my community and she's going to buy my services and all that stuff. But it's an invitation of like, here are all the ways that we can stay connected beyond this podcast. And I love that because that's another thing that podcasting can be really useful for, is building, like you said, that professional network and knowing, who are my key partners going to be? Maybe my guest is a potential client. Maybe my listener is a potential client. Maybe they're a potential referral source. Maybe they're a potential collaborator. Maybe they know someone who is a perfect fit for what I'm offering, and they're going to connect us together. So that the way that you're leveraging, I have no idea what your downloads are. I don't know what your audience size is.
Yeah.
I don't know what your conversion rate is of listeners to clients, but I know that those two strategies of looking at learning, developing, creating your messaging, seeing where the gaps are and where you might want to follow up, and then also building that community, building that professional network, those are two really smart ways to be leveraging your show.
Awesome. I love that. I'm glad I'm doing it right. I've been on a couple big podcasts and it was a hot mess. And I'm sitting here going, they have a huge team. They have all these people. Why was it so messy? I don't understand. So as I sit here and I do it myself, I want to make it so simple for me and for my guests. And so I'm glad to hear that it was easy and good. I try really hard to make it simple, but that's what this is about. And the funny thing is, I look at my downloads, but I look at them as, what's the best way to kind of phrase it? Loosely.
Yeah.
The last time I looked on Kajabi, because Kajabi is where I host it and then it goes out. I think it was like 1,500 downloads or something like that. Like it's not a crazy number. But
Yeah.
then when I go to Spotify, it's a different number. Apple's a different number. And then it goes out as a video podcast on YouTube. So I get different views there.
Yeah.
The way I look at it is, are the numbers going up? That's
Mm-hmm.
it. I just want to see a steady increase, not a number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's where strategy really comes into this, because one of the mistakes that I've seen a lot of people make is focusing on, okay, what do I want to talk about? And even if they are thinking of like, what do I have to share? What can I
Yeah.
educate? Even if they do already have that more of a service mindset, a lot of times what will happen is they'll focus so much on the nuts and bolts of the how to,
Yeah.
with like, okay, well, what's the best microphone? What's my setup? Where am I distributing this? What do my social media posts look like? All that stuff before they actually have really thought through what is the impact that I'm going to make. Because the clients that I work with are really focused on impact. So knowing the strategy of what place in your ecosystem does the podcast fulfill gives you a way to measure your success. And sometimes you have to be creative about how you do that. Is it that you are really doing a campaign to get people engaged with your podcast and you want that two-way feedback? You want people sending in stories, comments, emails, voice memos, things like that. Is it that the relationship building metric that's going to show you that whether I have 1,500 downloads or whether I have 200 downloads or whether I have 10,000 downloads, what matters more than that total number is how many of those are connecting back to me and what is the value of that connection. There's other ways to look at this as well. One of the examples that I love to talk about is a string quartet based in the Bay
Okay.
Area. They're called the Del Sol Quartet. They are incredible musicians, super passionate, top of their game, contemporary chamber music, working with living composers. And part of their ensemble's mission is not just to play incredible music and perform with top talent. They like to work on projects that also have a social impact message, meaning behind them, increasing awareness about perhaps immigration or the environment or people's relationship to nature or social things that are happening. So, how can we use music as a bridge to have these bigger social conversations? And so, you might be a fan, an audience member already. You already know the quartet, you already go to their concerts, you already follow them online, and you love their music. But maybe you didn't have a deep enough understanding of those stories behind the music, those stories behind the work that they're doing, the new commissions that they're doing. So I was introduced to them by someone we knew in common, and they wanted to build a bridge for their audience to their collaborators, to the community stakeholders, to people that they collaborate with. The San Francisco Poet Laureate is someone that they've done collaborative performances with, and her work has influenced them, and their work has influenced her. And so they wanted to build that awareness of this larger ecosystem and meaning behind their music. And so going back to the creative, when we first started talking, they said, we've wanted to do a podcast for a long time, but we thought, well, what are we going to do? Sit around the table and talk about cello techniques? Like, that's
Yes.
boring. We don't want to
Like,
do
what do you
that.
talk about? Yeah. Yeah.
And so how can we deliver that story? And we ended up on a 4-part narrative season to talk about one particular piece that they had commissioned from a contemporary composer that was talking about Chinese immigration into the United States in the mid 1900s through a port off the coast of San Francisco Bay called Angel Island. They had commissioned this oratorio piece. It had already premiered, but we were able to go back and sort of document that process, talk with the composer, talk with the poet who was connected with this particular culture, talk with one of their stage directors, talk with community members who have this heritage and get sort of those oral histories. And what was cool about that was their 4-episode, 1 season podcast experiment, did they get tens of thousands of people listening to that? No. But what they did do is catch the attention of some of the largest media stages in the country. Their podcast was actually accepted as a featured selection, official selection at the Tribeca Festival in New
Wow.
York, which is known for film, but in the last couple of years, they've started also doing audio projects and podcasts. And we were able to present this story and the quartet on stage in New York through this podcast. And that kind of credential, visibility through to new audiences that they would never have necessarily reached on their own. And the depth of meaning for all the people that we had on the show who were able to share their stories, which a lot of their families, of their history, and have that documented in a way that was really sensitive and creative and well crafted. We received so much positive feedback about how good everyone felt about being part of creating that piece of media and art that, unlike a string quartet live performance, which happens and then it's done, and only the people who were there got to experience it, this storytelling now lives online, presumably forever, and can be accessed time and time again by people across the world and into the future, which is one of the magic things that I love so much about podcasting. It's why even when things in the industry get frustrating, even when there's like tech problems and nitty gritty client stuff to figure out, or, changes in platforms or download measurement or all that kind of thing. It's what keeps bringing me back is the ability of this medium to really connect with people on a heart and soul level beyond just the education and the information. And that's the type of powerful podcast that I want to help people to make, is a podcast that, yes, we can have these conversations about strategy, about how-tos, about best practices, about tips. But in the end, your listeners are connecting back to you, Christina, because they trust you. There is a value that they get from the way you select your guests, the way you structure your interviews, the insights that you pull out for them. Even if it's not family history over lineage of complicated social impact topics, that's still impact. And that's still something that is making a difference in that listener's life. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep coming back to you as one of their top 3 to 5 podcasts week after week, right? Yeah. And so how can we design for that impact in mind from the beginning? And then also, how can we strategically measure it so that when you look at those download numbers and they aren't what you had hoped, how do we know whether it is actually still working and we just need to tweak a few things here or there, rather than just throwing in the towel and saying, this is not for me, it's too hard, it's too expensive, it takes too much time. Yeah.
I love, because you're talking about the back end story, and because I'm really phenomenal at business. And so I help tech startups. I've done a few, and it's a process with tech startups, because you have founders who are kind of like, this is what I want to do. And then when you start looking at it, you're like, but I have to tell you not to do it. That's a hard conversation. Yeah. But what I have found is when you do something like what you're just talking about, the back end story that nobody gets to see, because you listen to the music. It's beautiful. I grew up in the Bay Area, right? So it's beautiful. You hear it. You're like, oh, that was amazing. You leave, you go on to your life. Yeah. When your, let's call them listeners who come to listen to the music, know the back end story of that music, what it took to get there, why it was written, whatever it is that person's explaining about that story, that is 10,000 times more impactful than just a song. Yeah. Because we feel it in our heart. We feel it. We're like, we imagine the people when we hear a certain note in a rhythm, and you're like, oh, I can feel that person's heart and the struggle they went through. It's not just music anymore. Right. And so I tell people, when you're building your business, when you're telling your story, when you're creating what it is, you can't just be like, I'm going to teach you income jumps. It has to be like, I need to help you on the journey. Yeah. We're not going to focus on the goals, but what was that journey like? Tell us the struggles that you had to get here today, because they're going to relate way more to that than just like, oh, here's what happened. I have all these downloads. It's like, well, tell me the struggle you had to get to the downloads. What did you have to learn? Like I told you mine, you saw mine. Yeah. I wanted a podcast and I wanted to create something, but I wasn't loving what I was doing overall. So instead of just letting it run and keep doing it, I made the hard choice. And I said, I'm going to pivot. I'm going to change it.
Yeah.
The team that I was working with at the time was like, are you sure? Usually people don't just pivot middle. And I was like, I don't care what people do. I really don't. Like a lot of times I'll be like, I don't care what people do. Like I'm going to do my thing.
Yeah.
And I pivot and they're like, well, we should call it another season. I'm like, no, just keep going with it. Should we renumber it? I'm like, nope, just keep going with it because they wanted to renumber it to 001. And I'm like, well, I've only done 53. So, or 54, whatever I'm at now. And it's like, so keep it going because I want people to know there's more to listen to, not just one, but you got to change, you got to find you, and then you got to tell your story. And I am still working to find how to express that myself, to be honest. And I know you're really good at pulling out that story out of people. I struggle just because it's like, a lot of times when I think of my story, I'm like, oh, it's silly and dumb. Like no one cares about my story. And then I did a Instagram post where I talked about the first time I ever made over $500,000 take home to myself. I owed $300,000 in taxes that I didn't know I owed. Uh-huh.
Oh my God.
Yep. And I didn't have the money. And so that was like huge for me. So I had to go on a payment plan with the IRS and the
Yeah.
state. I had to figure it out for 2 years after I made that money. I was paying the taxes to it.
Yeah.
Well, guess what that did? That taught me how to set up some corporations. That taught me I need some really good tax attorneys. That
Yep.
taught me a lot of stuff that I had to figure out. But then I don't think anybody's interested. But when I made that post, it blew up.
Yeah.
Because it's the story of the struggle
Yeah.
and then what I learned. So I still myself have a lot of cool things back there, but I'm like, I don't know if people really want to hear it. And then everyone's like, no, share them. People want them. But it's hard to figure out what to share when you want to tell your story.
One thing when I said that interviews are the most popular format and the most common format, but they are kind of the hardest to execute well, that's what I'm talking about. Because this is one of the traps I see people falling into is the cookie cutter trap, right? We've listened to so many interview-based podcasts of entrepreneurs talking to entrepreneurs that we kind of think like that's how a podcast goes. Like the first question you should ask, first of all, you welcome them. Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Okay, that's boring. Cut that.
Yeah.
Don't put that. Then the first question is, so tell us about what you do and how you got to where you are today. No, don't start with that question. You didn't start with that question.
No.
So I was
I
so
do
grateful.
sometimes. I know sometimes. Well, it's funny because I was just editing one and I was like, I keep asking him this, but I am so big about let's get to the transformation first. Let's get to
Yeah.
like that nugget first. Because if someone's listening in the first 10 seconds, because I have an intro, I kind of intro you a little bit, then
Yeah.
I'll tie it in. I have my intro in there. So it's kind of a minute before we get to it. If
Right.
they're not hearing something interesting by probably minute 3, they're
out.
off. I do
Yeah.
that too. Like I'll listen to someone and they're like, oh yeah, it was great. And like 5 minutes into it, I'm like, oh my God, like I can't listen to this anymore. I'm
Yeah.
going to go to the next. So that's what I'm trying to do. But sometimes someone is so unique in what they do or the conversation is
Sure.
so unique that I feel like if I don't ask them and we just ask like a jumping question, it might be so odd. But I like just jumping in personally. It's better
Yeah.
for me.
It's not to say that I have never started with that question. Like, certainly, especially if it's somebody, like you said, that's really unique,
Yeah.
or it's hard to describe, or it's someone that I don't know well, or because I do also edit my own episodes as well. Sometimes I know I'm going to ask them that question, but I'm not actually going to include it in the final episode because I'm going to rephrase it for my intro. To your point, when I record an intro later, I just wanted to get their language so that I could say it in a way that's maybe more concise and succinct in the intro. So in terms of the skill of interviewing and running an interview show, knowing what are those questions that I can ask if somebody is talking long, how can I carefully and skillfully redirect? If somebody has a story, but they're not quite telling it, you know they've got a backstory to something, and they're not quite like, what are the skillful questions that I can ask that are going to help pull that story out of them? What are the follow-up questions when I hear something interesting that I'm like, oh, that was interesting. Let me like not gloss over that. Let me ask another question. Or even sometimes just say more about that. Something, because you have that intuition as you're interviewing that you're actively listening. You're not just looking at a list of questions that you've prepared in advance. You're actively listening. You're picking up on cues of where there might be more. I say sometimes we go on a tangent in our recordings. We go down a rabbit hole. I'm like, don't worry if you go down the rabbit hole, because if it doesn't work for the episode, I'll pull it out after.
Okay.
It'll be fine.
I had one and it was like 5 minutes, but I was like, she didn't even get to the point, and I just like cut it because
Yeah.
you're listening and then you're like waiting for the point and we missed the point because I don't know what happened when we were recording, but I was like, oh, it was good. Like we were going somewhere good and we got lost. So I just cut it out. But
you could just cut it out. But on the flip side, sometimes you go down that rabbit hole and you don't know where it's going.
Yeah.
And it ends up being the most brilliant part of the episode.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't have known unless you went there. So that's another thing that I love about podcasting is just the flexibility of it and the amount of control. It doesn't have to be live. It's not straight to the radio. It doesn't have to be compact. You have room for depth and nuance. It doesn't have to be, you know, a 90-second, 60-second, 30-second social media clip. So you can kind of follow your curiosity and explore and come to these new realizations that you may not have come to otherwise.
What do you think about scripts? And she comes on, but see, the thing is, she is so scripted. She had a list of questions because she literally was like, okay, tell me about, while she's looking at a screen asking, and it throws off your flow. It's really hard. And then she wasn't listening to anything I was saying, just asking questions that were on a list. They don't ask you real questions. They're not insightful. What does that mean for a podcast? Like, how are you out of the box thinking for a podcast?
Yeah.
Right? Like that kind of pulled me. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And then the storytelling, because I was like, that's a hard thing for me. Like, how do I add more storytelling into a podcast when sometimes I feel like I add the story in when someone makes a comment, but then I feel like I'm talking too much. But then it's like, should I talk more or less? So
As the host,
right? So you had really cool concepts, but I want to listen. I want to be engaged. I have 3 questions on my sheet just in case we stall. Because sometimes I'll have guests on and they're like, it's funny how they do this. I'll have a question. They answer the question, but they will loop themselves back into a hole. So when they answer the question, it stops and I'm like, I don't know how to ask you a question on that question. Like you didn't leave me room to ask you.
It's like a rehearsed answer that is not a conversation, right? It doesn't continue the conversation. I will never be accused of doing that because I will talk long. So you started off asking about scripts and then talking about this very formulaic thing. And in that case, she probably has producers that are picking guests and doing all the guest prep for her. She probably has no idea who you were before you popped on. And that sucks. Just honestly, my opinion, I dislike that. So why are they doing a podcast? Or they're just not, their heart isn't in it. It's just another intellectual property piece. And those are the wrong reasons. That person that you were talking about, I don't know who it is, but they probably have a bigger audience, certainly than I do. But if you were to come on my show, which is something we will be talking about in the future, but if you were to come on my show, you're probably going to get a better experience and it's going to be more worthwhile and more meaningful because I am only having you there because I'm interested in you. I am engaged with you. I think that you're a perfect fit for my audience and I want to be that bridge and introduce you. And if nothing else, the quality of our time together and our conversation together should leave you feeling like that was a great conversation. I feel so inspired, or I learned something new about myself today. In terms of having producers prep questions for you, I mean, I have some clients that I work very collaboratively with where they actually go to the recording studio. This is like the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. Their show is called Encounter Culture. They're a government agency. Their host, she's a journalist and a magazine editor. She prepares all her questions. We work together to select guests for the season on behalf of the department. Cool. And then she goes into the studio. I remote in because she's in New Mexico and I am not. She does her questions with the guests, but I'm also there as a producer in real time, listening to the conversation. I'm like the second pair of ears for the audience. And I'm like, the audience isn't going to know what that means. That was jargon. Let's follow up on that. Or, that thing that he said was really interesting. And then we went on to the next topic. I want to circle back to that thing. And so she can do that. And she has me listening as a backup as well. And so we kind of have those 2 sets of ears, those 2 brains. And, you know, I can give her a question. And sometimes I'll give her a question that she's like, I don't want to ask that question. Or can you give it to me in a different way? Because that sounds, weird. Or I might have something that's a little bit more marketing sounding. And she's a journalist. And she's like, that's giving me the marketing. Like that
journalist. Yes. Yeah.
And I'll be like, okay, let's do it this way. But so there are definitely ways that you can work with a producer that still are authentic and not coming from a place of like, okay, let's paint by numbers, do the thing and create the piece of content that doesn't really move the needle.
Yeah. Because you're wasting all your time. there is so much time that goes into creating these.
Mhm.
It's not just, oh, I'm going to have a guest on. I know somebody come on. It's like I put out information to people. I reach out to people directly, but I also have places that I post. And I'm like, if you think you're a good guest, I have a form, fill out the form. Then I review the form. If the form
Yeah.
looks good, then I invite you to join. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of steps, a lot of things for me to do. It's not just like, come on.
Yeah.
And so all that time that's spent, you want to make it worthwhile. And I feel like that goes back to the conversation of we're trying to just get downloads. We're trying to just make money. We're trying to sell something. If you're going to go down that route, it's a long freaking journey because you need to use time to get there,
Yeah.
right? Like look at Jenna Kutcher. I don't even know what number she's on now. I think she's like 400 or maybe even 700 now. Like, could you imagine 700 episodes? They do
Yeah.
one a week. That's a long
It's a lot.
time to be doing this. And even if she has a team or other people have a team, like it's still the time you're sitting to
Yeah.
do these. If you're not gonna really enjoy it, or you're not authentic to yourself, that's part of you were talking about the overwhelm, right? Like
Yep.
it seems daunting because you hate it. If you don't
Mhm.
like who you're talking to, you don't like what you're doing, you're gonna first feel overwhelmed, and then the second feeling is hate.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to show up. I don't want to do it. Like why am I here, right?
Yeah.
So
It's part of something that I started calling the Field of Dreams fallacy for anyone who is old enough to remember that movie, The
yes.
Field of Dreams. Most people know the phrase from Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will
They will
come,
come.
right?
Not really.
And that's not true. I started podcasting about a decade ago. And at that time, it was a little bit true
Yeah.
because podcasting was still new enough and still independent enough. And Spotify had nothing to do with podcasting, and YouTube had nothing to do with podcasting. And there was much more independent creator focused that
Yeah.
you could almost create your niche podcast and be one of only a few in that niche. And I used to do a presentation for people about how to launch your podcast. And in my presentation and marketing strategies, I actually had a slide that one of my marketing bullet points was the magic of Apple Podcasts.
Okay. I
And I'm
like that.
this is not a thing anymore. Like, yes, there are ways that you can get promotion from Apple Podcasts, but it's hard. It's not magic. It's
Yeah.
like strategy, right? And so all of that to say that your point about it taking long is that this is not a strategy where you're going to have a brilliant idea for a podcast, invest in all the startup stuff, start your podcast with a great idea, some awesome guests, and put it out there, and you're going to have an instant audience that's reacting to you. It
No.
doesn't. You see celebrities with big numbers. You also see people bragging on social media about like, oh my God, we just launched with 3 episodes and we already have 500,000 downloads. I'm like,
But
no,
they had people, they don't, you know what people understand is they already had an audience. I get people all the time who are
Yeah.
like, Christina, I want to be like this person. You know, they just came out of nowhere and
Yeah.
they launched this course or they did this thing and they made all this money instantly. I'm like, no, they had an audience somewhere.
Yeah.
You don't just launch or you don't just create a podcast or YouTube and then all of a sudden get it. And there's a creator I know on YouTube and he talks about this and he said, there's this lady, but if you look at her YouTube, I think it was like 10 videos or 12 videos. And it's all she's made. And she has over 1 million subscribers. Well, you can't do that, right? And then he goes, but here's a story no one sees. She has over 1 million subscribers on TikTok. So she asked them what they want in a YouTube channel and looked at all the comments, screened it all through, and then created a YouTube channel just on what they wanted.
Yeah.
That's how it
Yeah.
works. People don't get that.
Yeah. And so comparing yourself to her results, not going to work, right?
Yeah.
I think for most of us, it's a strategy that works well when you do it in a certain way that is aligned with what your goals and your outcomes and your impact are. And you have to be committed. It's going to take time. So you need to do it in a way that's going to be sustainable and you need to love it. I had a client for a couple of years who his show was doing quite well and it was building slowly over time and he was seeing good results from it. And one day he contacted me and he's like, this is really hard to say, but I'm going to end my show. And I was like, oh no, why? And he's like, I just don't like doing it.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow.
All
He's
the
like, yeah,
time.
I'm not sure if I ever liked doing it.
Mm.
I was like, wow, it took you several years.
And that's the hard thing, right? It's like all that time. And so before I started this, I was like, am I going to be committed? Can I do it for 700 episodes?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, yeah, like I like having conversations. I will tell you, I put everybody in 3 days. So last month I did 8 recordings in 3 days.
That's a lot.
It was a lot. And I was like, no more than, okay, now my rule is no more than six
Yeah.
because it was too much. But like I do it all at one time and it's
Yeah.
a little exhausting for a week, but then I'm okay a whole month, right?
Yeah.
I kind of batch it so I enjoy it instead of trying to do it every day. I have a question for you that I think on this whole conversation.
Sure.
You find that there are a lot of big companies that are funding a lot of podcasts because there's money to be made? Or do you think that a lot of the good podcasts are still, I want to say, independently owned by the creator?
Yeah, we're in an interesting landscape right now where the last couple of years there was a lot of money from the
Hmm.
bigger networks. Spotify was throwing ridiculous amounts of money at shows. What we've seen happening industry wide is a lot of those bigger, more visible shows are backed by a network. Even within that, some of the bigger independent networks, like let's say Wondery is one that some people may know of. Wondery had a business model where they would take IP from independent creators, bring them into their network, and then they would kind of develop something that could be then pitched as like a Netflix movie or a TV series or a documentary or something like that. So they would take the podcast IP and then try to push it out into a bigger, wider broadcast format. And they were doing quite well with that. Well, Amazon acquired them. And then this year, Amazon was like, these podcasts are too expensive to produce. We're shutting down Wondery and laying everybody off. Just as a simplification. So I know from being friends with folks in the industry who are pitching independent projects to networks. I have a good friend, Tanya Muhammad, who was on my podcast, The Creative Imposter, talking about an audio documentary series that she's been producing about the vibrant music scene in a certain area of Pakistan where her family and her father was a musician. She's been taking all these meetings with different networks about getting support to finish this project and distribute it. And it's partially done. Like they're already in process. They're just, looking for like who's going to give us those finishing funds and help us distribute and possibly do ad sales or something like that. And she's meeting with all these people and they're like, we love your project. We love you. We love what you're doing. There's no money. I don't have a budget. I like all of our assets are like just frozen right now because of uncertainty in the economy. So there was this big boom of industry network money. And now things are kind of going like, well, unless you're a celebrity,
Hmm.
we don't
Yeah.
have a budget for
You love
something more
that?
indie. And that's not the world that I have friends in that world and
Yeah.
colleagues in that world, but who I'm really focused on is I'm focused on those indie creators who aren't necessarily trying to like get sponsorship deals and ad sales, though that might be a strategy that we might use. I do have a couple clients that have their own sponsors who fund the entirety of their show. They're
Oh,
kind of
that's
like their
cool.
premier sponsors, but that's just what allows them to continue to make the show in the way that they want to. And that's through a relationship that they built with that aligned company. But we're really looking at like how can an indie creator build a more powerful podcast to inspire their audiences to some form of impact that ultimately benefits your audience member, but then also benefits you.
Yes, and that's the way it should be. And as we're wrapping up the podcast, this is
Yeah.
a great ending point because I want you to talk about how people can find you and how you can help them.
Absolutely. So, my boutique agency is the Creative Imposter Studios. And I say boutique because we're working with those indie creators and we only work with a handful of creators at any given time because we really want to go deep into not just the nuts and bolts of producing your podcast, but also the strategy. So, we have some clients who we don't actually produce their show, we are just their strategic partners on a quarterly basis in terms of building out what is their approach, what does their content look like, what are some experiments that we can run with their data to see if things shift in one direction or another, who are some shows that we might want to partner with on a marketing strategy, a collaborative
Okay.
marketing strategy. And then there are shows that we do produce from top to bottom, like I said, sitting in on their sessions and live producing them. And then there are shows that it's kind of a hybrid approach where we do some strategy consulting and then they do all their guest booking and recording and all this stuff. And then they upload all their files to Dropbox and we take care of the rest from that so that they don't have to do the editing or publishing or anything like that. I'm going to offer a 30-minute complimentary consulting call. It is not a sales call. You're going to answer a few questions when you book the time. I'm going to look at everything that you have going on, and we're going to spend 30 minutes just ideating about your strategy based on what I see. And if you want to know about my services after the fact, great. But otherwise, it's just 30 minutes for me to get to know what you're working on, for you to get to know a little bit about my process. We both walk away with value. So that's what I want to offer to your listeners is
Yay,
that
they love
30-minute complimentary call, not a sales call. Very
Yeah.
clear. You're not going to get sucked into some awkward situation. And it's for really three types of people.
Okay.
So someone who does not have a podcast, but they've kind of been dreaming, I call them pod dreamers. They're kind of like thinking about like, it would be really cool if I had a podcast, or maybe that might work for me.
Yeah.
And I can learn a little bit about what you have going on, what your goals are. And I can actually probably tell you like, maybe this isn't your strategy right now. And maybe you want to set this aside on the back burner, or maybe this is like how you could really leverage podcasting right now. And here are some ways you could do that. The second person is somebody who has a show like you, and it's trucking along, it's doing what it's doing. And maybe there's a problem or a frustration that you're having, or maybe it's fine, but you're just kind of like, what else could I be doing? Is there something I'm missing here? And so that would be somebody who is pod strong. They've got their show, but they're just wondering what other strategic opportunities are there. And then the third person is my pod faders. These are those people that I talked about that they had a show at one point. They loved their show. And then they had to end it for whatever reason, probably because they just ran out of time, or they weren't sure if it was working or what direction it was going. And it fell to the back burner. And they are like, man, I really want to make a comeback. I really want to bring this back. Doesn't make sense. How would I go about doing that? So those are kind of the three different types of people that could benefit from this session. I have a handful of spaces available, and you can book those. There's a short link, which I'm sure Christina will put in the show notes.
Yes, I will.
And it is bit.ly/CK pod with Andrea. So bit.ly/CK pod with Andrea. And that'll take you straight to the booking page. If you're like, oh, not quite ready to have a conversation, that's a lot, like that feels intense, totally fine. You can, do the follow, hang out, read the things, listen to the things, of course, by following the Creative Imposter podcast on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube as well. We've been live streaming episodes as of late and then publishing them later as audio. And of course, connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Instagram at The Creative Imposter, and you can kind of lurk for a while and then see if a conversation might be right for you.
I like that. They do, but that's how it works. You got to like test them out, try it out. And then it's like, oh, they are my people. I always tell people, like, maybe you're not my people, but you're going to look at me. Maybe now you'll be like, oh, I'm going to move on, but you'll always come back. You'll come back to me. Don't worry.
I tell people, I'm like, man, I've been listening to podcasts for so long. And there are people who I listened to their show for years before I ever reached out to them. They had no idea that I was in their audience or who I was. And then, 3 years later, I'm like, I'm going to book a coaching with this person because right now is the time. And we now have known each other for 3 years.
Yeah, it's just going to be in the zone with them because you never know when it's going to be. And I love that you have the 3 different people and you're very clear on who you're looking to serve, which is great. So I'm going to put all of the links for everything in the show notes. If you're watching, it will be below the video on YouTube. That way you can connect with her and make sure that, just check it out. It just feels good to share with somebody your concerns and your hesitations to everything. And then that person can either say, like you said, I'll tell you if you're right or wrong. Like, I'll let you know. And that just gives you that opportunity. So book a call if you're interested. It doesn't hurt. You get to learn if it's right or wrong. And then she has such cool ideas. You can definitely learn maybe a cool way of pitching it. Or if you already have one, how you can shift your story a little bit. And then, like I said, if she's not right, you got some good information. So
absolutely.
I appreciate you coming onto the podcast. The conversation was awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.